Chapter 15, Part 2 of Emily Brontë by Agnes Mary Frances Robinson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Wuthering Heights, the story, Part 2. Catherine's welcome changed his plan. Her brother was safe from Heathcliff's violence, but not from his hate. The score was being settled in a different fashion. Hindley, who was eager to get money for his gambling and who had drunk his wits away, was only too glad to take Heathcliff as lodger, boon companion, and fellow card-player at once. And Heathcliff was content to wait and take his revenge sip by sip, encouraging his old oppressor in drink and gaming, watching him lose acre after acre of his land, knowing that sooner or later Earnshaw would lose everything, and he, Heathcliff, be master of Wuthering Heights, with Hindley's son for his servant. Revenge is sweet. Meanwhile, Wuthering Heights was a handy lodging at walking distance from the Grange. But soon his visits were cut off. Isabella Linton, a charming girl of 18 with an espiègle face and a thin sweetness of disposition that could easily turn sour, Isabella Linton fell in love with Heathcliff. To do him justice, he had never dreamed of marrying her, until one day Catherine, in a fit of passion, revealed the poor girl's secret. Heathcliff pretended not to believe her, but Isabel was her brother's heir, and to marry her, inherit Edgar's money, and ill-use his sister would indeed be a fair revenge on Catherine's husband. At first it was merely as an artistically pleasurable idea, a castle in the air to be dreamed about, not built, that this scheme suggested itself to Heathcliff. But one day, when he had been detected in an experimental courting of Isabel, Edgar Linton, glad of an excuse, turned him out of doors. Then, in a paroxysm of hatred, never satisfied revenge, and baffled passion, Heathcliff struck with the poisoned weapon ready to his hand. He persuaded Isabel to run away with him, no difficult task, and they eloped together one night to be married. Isabella, poor, weak, romantic, sprightly Isabel, was not missed at first, for very terrible trouble had fallen upon the Grange. Catherine, in a paroxysm of rage at the dismissal of Heathcliff, quarrelled violently with Edgar and shut herself up in her own room. For 3 days and nights she remained there, eating nothing, Edgar secluded in his study, expecting every moment that she would come down and ask his forgiveness. Nelly Dean, who alone knew of her determined starving, resolved to say nothing about it, and conquer once for all the haughty and passionate spirit which possessed her beautiful young mistress. So 3 days went by. Catherine still refused all her food, and unsympathetic Ellen still resolved to let her starve, if she chose, without remonstrance. On the 3rd day Catherine unbarred her door and asked for food, and now Ellen Dean was too frightened to exult. Her mistress was wasted, haggard, wild, as if by months of illness. The too presumptuous servant remembered the doctor's warning, and dreaded her master's anger when he should discover Catherine's real condition. On this servant's obstinate cold-heartedness rests the crisis of Wuthering Heights. Had Ellen Dean at the first attempted to console the violent, childish Catherine, had she acquainted Edgar of the real weakness underneath her pride, Catherine would have had no fatal illness and left no motherless child, and had moping Isabel, instead of being left to weep alone about the park and garden, been conducted to her sister's room and shown a real sickness to nurse, a real misery to mend, she would not have gone away with Heathcliff and wedded herself to sorrow out of a fanciful love and idleness. It is characteristic of Emily Bronte's genius that she should choose so very simple and homely a means for the production of most terrible results. A fit she had had, alone and untended, during those 3 days of isolated starvation, had unsettled Catherine's reason. The gradual coming on of her delirium is given with a masterly pathos that Webster need not have made more strong, nor Fletcher more lovely and appealing. A minute previously she was violent. Now, supported on one arm, and not noticing my refusal to obey her, she seemed to find childish diversion in pulling the feathers from the rents she had just made in the pillows, and ranging them on the sheet according to their different species. Her mind had strayed to other associations. "That's a turkey's," she murmured to herself, "and this is a wild duck's, and this is a pigeon's. Ah, they put pigeons' feathers in the pillows. No wonder I couldn't die. Let me take care to throw it on the floor when I lie down. And here's a moorcock's, and this, I should know it among 1,000, it's a lapwing's. Bonny bird, wheeling over our heads in the middle of the moor. It wanted to get to its nest, for the clouds had touched the swells, and it felt rain coming. This feather was picked up from the heath. The bird was not shot. We saw its nest in the winter, full of little skeletons. Heathcliff set a trap over it, and the old ones dare not come. I made him promise he'd never shoot a lapwing after that, and he didn't. Yes, here are more. Did he shoot my lapwings, Nelly? Are they red, any of them? Let me look." "Give over with that baby work," I interrupted, dragging the pillow away and turning the holes toward the mattress, for she was removing its contents by handfuls. "Lie down and shut your eyes. You're wandering. There's a mess. The down is flying about like snow." I went here and there collecting it. "I see in you, Nelly," she continued dreamily, "an aged woman. You have grey hair and bent shoulders. This bed is the fairy cave under Penistone Crag, and you are gathering elf bolts to hurt our heifers, pretending, while I am near, that they are only locks of wool. That's what you'll come to 50 years hence. I know you are not so now. I'm not wandering. You're mistaken, or else I should believe you really were that withered hag, and I should think I was under Penistone Crag. And I'm conscious it's night, and there are 2 candles on the table making the black press shine like jet." "The black press? Where is that?" I asked. "You are talking in your sleep." "It's against the wall as it always is," she replied. "It does appear odd. I see a face in it." "There's no press in the room, and never was," said I, resuming my seat and looping up the curtain so I might watch her. "Don't you see that face?" she inquired, gazing earnestly at the mirror. And say what I could, I was incapable of making her comprehend it to be her own, so I rose and covered it with a shawl. "It's behind there still," she pursued anxiously, "and it stirred. Who is it? I hope it will not come out when you are gone. Oh, Nelly, the room is haunted. I'm afraid of being alone." I took her hand in mine and bid her be composed, for a succession of shudders convulsed her frame, and she would keep straining her gaze toward the glass. "There's nobody here," I insisted. "It was yourself, Mrs. Linton. You knew it a while since." "Myself!" she gasped. "And the clock is striking 12. It's true, then. That's dreadful." Her fingers clutched the clothes and gathered them over her eyes. This scene was the beginning of a long and fearful brain fever, from which, owing to her husband's devoted and ceaseless care, Catherine recovered her life, but barely her reason. That hung in the balance. A touch might settle it on the side of health or of madness. Not until the beginning of this fever was Isabella's flight discovered. Her brother was too concerned with his wife's illness to feel as heartbroken as Heathcliff hoped. He was not violent against his sister, nor even angry. Only with the mild, steady persistence of his nature he refused to hold any communication with Heathcliff's wife. But when at the beginning of Catherine's recovery Ellen Dean received a letter from Isabella declaring the extreme wretchedness of her life at Wuthering Heights, where Heathcliff was master now, Edgar Linton willingly accorded the servant permission to go and see his sister. Arrived at Wuthering Heights, she found that once plentiful homestead sorely ruined and deteriorated by years of thriftless dissipation, and Isabella Linton, already metamorphosed into a wan and listless slattern, broken-spirited and pale. As a pleasant means of entertaining his wife and her old servant, Heathcliff discoursed on his love for Catherine, and on his conviction that she could not really care for Edgar Linton. "Catherine has a heart as deep as I have. The sea could be as readily contained in that horse trough as her whole affection monopolized by him. Tush! He is scarcely a degree dearer to her than her dog or her horse. It is not in him to be loved like me. How can she love in him what he has not?" Nelly Dean, unhindered by the sight of Isabella's misery or by the memory of the wrongs her master already suffered from this estimable neighbour, was finally cajoled into taking a letter from him to the frail, half-dying Catherine, appointing an interview. For Heathcliff persisted that he had no wish to make a disturbance or to exasperate Mr. Linton, but merely to see his old playfellow again, to learn from her own lips how she was, and whether in anything he could serve her. The letter was taken and given. The meeting came about one Sunday when all the household save Ellen Dean were at church. Catherine, pale, apathetic, but more than ever beautiful in her mazed weakness of mind and body. Heathcliff, violent in despair, seeing death in her face, alternately upbraiding her fiercely for causing him so much misery, and tenderly caressing the altered, dying face. Never was so strange a love scene. It is not a scene to quote, not noticeable for its eloquent passages or the beauty of casual phrases, but for its sustained passion, desperate, pure, terrible. It must be read in its sequence and its entirety. Nor can I think of any parting more terrible, more penetrating in its anguish than this. Romeo and Juliet part, but they have known each other but for a week. There is no scene that Heathcliff can look upon in which he has not played with Catherine, and now that she is dying, he must not watch with her. Troilus and Cressida part, but Cressida is false, and Troilus has his country left him. What country has Heathcliff, the outcast, nameless adventurer? Antonio and his Duchess, but they have belonged to each other and been happy. These two are eternally separate. Their passion is only heightened by its absolute freedom from desire. Even the wicked and desperate Heathcliff has no ignoble love for Catherine. All he asks is that she live, and that he may see her, that she may be happy, even if it be with Linton. I would never have banished him from her society while she desired his, asserts Heathcliff, and now she is mad with grief and dying. The consciousness of their strained and thwarted natures, moreover, makes us the more regretful they must sever. Had he survived, Romeo would have been happy with Rosalind after all. Probably Juliet would have married Paris. But where will Heathcliff love again? The perverted, morose, brutalized Heathcliff, whose only human tenderness has been his love for the capricious, lively, beautiful young creature now dazed, now wretched, now dying in his arms. The very remembrance of his violence and cruelty renders more awful the spectacle of this man, sitting with his dying love, silent, their faces hid against each other and washed by each other's tears. At last they parted, Catherine unconscious, half dead. That night her puny 7 months' child was born. That night the mother died, unutterably changed from the bright, imperious creature who entered that house as a kingdom not yet a year ago. By her side in the darkened chamber her husband lay, worn out with anguish. Outside, dashing his head against the trees in a berserker wrath with fate, Heathcliff raged, not to be consoled. Her senses never returned. She recognized nobody from the time you left her, I said. She lies with a sweet smile upon her face, and her latest ideas wandered back to pleasant early days. Her life closed in a gentle dream. May she wake as kindly in the other world. May she wake in torment, he cried with frightful vehemence, stamping his foot and groaning in a paroxysm of ungovernable passion. Why, she's a liar to the end. Where is she? Not there, not in heaven, not perished. Where? Oh, you said you cared nothing for my sufferings, and I pray one prayer. I repeat it till my tongue stiffens. Catherine Earnshaw, may you not rest as long as I am living. You said I killed you. Haunt me then. The murdered do haunt their murderers, I believe. I know that ghosts have wandered on earth. Be with me always. Take any form. Drive me mad. Only do not leave me in this abyss where I cannot find you. Oh God, it is unutterable. I cannot live without my life. I cannot live without my soul. He dashed his head against the knotted trunk, and lifting up his eyes, howled, not like a man, but like a savage beast being goaded to death with knives and spears. I observed several splashes of blood about the bark of the tree, and his hand and forehead were both stained. Probably the scene I witnessed was the repetition of others acted during the night. It hardly moved my compassion, it appalled me. From this time a slow, insidious madness worked in Heathcliff. When it was at its height, he was not fierce, but strangely silent, scarcely breathing, hushed as a person who draws his breath to hear some sound only just not heard as yet, as a man who strains his eyes to see the speck on the horizon which will rise the next moment, the next instant, and grow into the ship that brings his treasure home. When I sat in the house with Hareton, it seemed that on going out I should meet her. When I walked on the moors, I should meet her coming in. When I went from home, I hastened to return. She must be somewhere at the Heights, I was certain. And when I slept in her chamber, I was beaten out of that. I couldn't lie there, for the moment I closed my eyes, she was either outside the window, or sliding back the panels, or entering the room, or even resting her darling head on the same pillow as she did when a child, and I must open my lids to see. And so I opened and closed them 100 times a night, to be always disappointed. It was a strange way of killing, not by inches, but by fractions of hairbreadths, to beguile me with the spectre of a hope through 18 years. This mania of expectation, stretching the nerves to their uttermost strain, relaxed sometimes, and then Heathcliff was dangerous. When filled with the thought of Catherine, the world was indifferent to him. But when this possessing memory abated ever so little, he remembered that the world was his enemy, had cheated him of Catherine. Then avarice, ambition, revenge entered into his soul, and his last state was worse than his first. Cruel with the insane cruelty, the blood mania of an Ezzelin, he never was. His cruelties had a purpose. The sufferings of the victims were a detail, not an end. Yet something of that despot's character, refined into torturing the mind and not the flesh, chaste, cruel, avaricious of power, something of that southern morbidness in crime distinguishes Heathcliff from the villains of modern English tragedies. Placed in the Italian Renaissance with Cyril Tourneur for a chronicler, Heathcliff would not have awakened the outburst of incredulous indignation which greeted his appearance in a 19th-century romance. Soon after the birth of the younger Catherine, Isabella Heathcliff escaped from her husband to the south of England. He made no attempt to follow her, and in her new home she gave birth to a son, Linton, the fruit of timidity and hatred, fear and revulsion. From the first, she reported him to be an ailing, peevish creature. Meanwhile, little Catherine grew up, the very light of her home, an exquisite creature, with her father's gentle, constant nature, inspired by a spark of her mother's fire, and lightened by a gleam of her wayward caprice. She had the Earnshaw's handsome dark eyes, and the Lintons' fair skin, regular features, and curling yellow hair. That capacity for intense attachments reminded me of her mother. Still, she did not resemble her. Her anger was never furious, her love never fierce, it was deep and tender. Cathy was in truth a charming creature, though less passionate and strange in nature than Catherine Earnshaw, not made to be loved as wildly nor as deeply mistrusted. Edgar, grown a complete hermit, devoted himself to his child, who spent a life as happy and secluded as a princess in a fairy story, seldom venturing outside the limits of the park and never by herself. Edgar had never forgotten his sorrow for the death of his young wife. He loved her memory with steady constancy. If, and I think we may, if we allow that every author has some especial quality with which in more or less degree he endows all his children, if we grant that Shakespeare's people are all meditative, even the sprightly Rosalind and the clownish Dogberry, if we allow that all our acquaintances in Dickens are a trifle self-conscious, in George Eliot conscientious to such an extent that even Tito Milema feels remorse for conduct which, granted his period and his character, would more naturally have given him satisfaction, then we must allow that Emily Bronte's special mark is constancy. Passionate, insane constancy in Heathcliff, perverse but intense in the elder Catherine, steady and holy in Edgar Linton. Even the hard and narrow Ellen Dean, even Joseph, the hypocritical Pharisee, are constant until death. While Hindley Earnshaw drinks himself to death for grief at losing his consumptive wife, Hareton loves to the end the man who has usurped his place, degraded him, fed him on blows and exaction, and it is constancy in absence that embitters and sickens the younger Catherine. Even Isabella Heathcliff, weak as she is not fickle. Even Linton Heathcliff, who of all the characters in fiction may share with Barnes Newcombe the bad eminence of supreme unlovableness, even he loves his mother and Catherine, and in his selfish way loves them to the end. The years passed, nothing happened, save that Hindley Earnshaw died, and Heathcliff, to whom every yard had been mortgaged, took possession of the place. Hareton, who should have been the first gentleman in the neighbourhood, being reduced to a state of complete dependence on his father's inveterate enemy, lives as a servant in his own house, deprived of the advantages of wages, quite unable to right himself because of his friendlessness and his ignorance that he has been wronged. The eventless years went by till Catherine was 13, when Mrs. Heathcliff died, and Edgar went to the south of England to fetch her son. Little Cathy, during her father's absence, grew impatient of her confinement in the park. There was no one to escort her over the moors, so one day she leaped the fence, got lost, and was finally sheltered at Wuthering Heights, of which place and of all its inmates she had been kept in total ignorance. She promised to keep the visit a secret from her father, lest he should dismiss Ellen Dean. She was very indignant at being told that rudely bred Hareton was her cousin, and when that night Linton, delicate, pretty, pettish Linton, arrived, she infinitely preferred his cousinship. The next morning she found Linton gone, his father having sent for him to Wuthering Heights. Edgar Linton, however, did not tell his daughter that her cousin was so near. He would not for worlds she should cross the threshold of that terrible house. But one day Cathy and Ellen Dean met Heathcliff on the moors, and he half persuaded, half forced them to come home and see his son, grown a most despicable, puling, ailing creature, half violent, half terrified. Cathy's kind little heart did not see the faults. She only saw that her cousin was ill, unhappy, in need of her. She was easily entrapped, one winter when her father and Ellen Dean were both ill, into a secret engagement with this boy cousin, the only lad save uncouth Hareton whom she had ever seen. Every night, when her day's nursing was done, she rode over to Wuthering Heights to pet and fondle Linton. Heathcliff did all he could to favour the plan. He knew his son was dying, notwithstanding that every care was taken to preserve the air of Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange. It is true that Cathy had a rival claim. To marry her to Linton would be to secure the title, get a wife for his dying son to preserve the line of inheritance, and certainly to break Edgar Linton's heart. Heathcliff's love of revenge and love of power combined to make the scheme a thing to strive for and desire. He grew desperate as the boy got weaker and weaker. It was but too likely that he would die before his dying uncle, and if Edgar Linton survived, Thrushcross Grange was lost to Heathcliff. As a last resource, he made his son write to Edgar Linton and beg for an interview on neutral ground. Edgar, who, ignorant of Linton Heathcliff's true character, saw no reason why Cathy should not marry her cousin if they loved each other, allowed Ellen Dean to take her little mistress, now 17 years old, on to the moors, where Linton Heathcliff was to meet them. Cathy was loath to leave her father even for an hour, he was so ill, but she had been told Linton was dying, so nerved herself to go once more on the moors. They found Linton in a strange state, terrified, exhausted, despondent, making spasmodic love to Cathy as if it were a lesson he had been beaten into learning. She wished to return, but the boy declared himself and looked too ill to go back alone. They escorted him home to the Heights, and Heathcliff persuaded them to enter, saying he would go for a doctor for his sick lad. But once they were in the house, he showed his hand. The doors were bolted, the servants and Hareton away. Neither tears nor prayers would induce him to let his victims go till Catherine was Linton's wife, and so he told her till her father had died in solitude. But 5 days after, Catherine Linton, now Catherine Heathcliff, contrived an escape in time to console her father's dying hours with a false belief in her happiness, a noble lie, for Edgar Linton died contented, kissing his daughter's cheek, ignorant of the misery in store for her. The next day Heathcliff came over to the Grange to recapture his prey. But now Catherine did not mind. Her father dead, she received all the affronts and stings of fate with an enduring apathy. It was only her that they injured. A few days after, Linton died in the night, alone with his bride. After a year's absolute misery and loneliness, Catherine's lot was a little lightened by Mr. Heathcliff's preferring Ellen Dean to the vacant post of housekeeper at Wuthering Heights. For the all-absorbing presence of Catherine Earnshaw had nearly secluded Heathcliff from enmity with the world. He was seldom violent now. He became yet more and more disinclined to society, sitting alone, seldom eating, often walking about the whole night. His face changed, and the look of brooding hate gave way to a yet more alarming expression, an excited, wild, unnatural appearance of joy. He complained of no illness, yet he was very pale, bloodless, and his teeth visible now and then in a kind of smile, his frame shivering, not as one shivers with chill or weakness, but as a tight-stretched cord vibrates, a strong thrilling rather than trembling. At last his mysterious absorption, the stress of his expectation, became so intense that he could not eat. Animated with hunger, he would sit down to his meal, then suddenly start as if he saw something, glance at the door or the window, and go out. Weary and pale, he could not sleep, but left his bed hurriedly and went out to pace the garden till break of day. "It is not my fault," he replied, "that I cannot eat or rest. I assure you it is through no settled design. I'll do both as soon as I possibly can, but you might as well bid a man struggling in the water rest within arm's length of the shore. I must reach it first, and then I'll rest. As to repenting of my injustices, I've done no injustice, and I repent of nothing. I'm too happy, and yet I'm not happy enough. My soul's bliss kills my body, but does not satisfy itself." Meanwhile the schemes of a life, the deeply laid purposes of his revenge, were toppling unheeded all around him like a house of cards. His son was dead. Hareton Earnshaw, the real heir of Wuthering Heights, and Catherine, the real heir of Thrushcross Grange, had fallen in love with each other. A most unguessed at and unlikely finale, yet most natural. For Catherine was spoiled, accomplished, beautiful, proud, yet most affectionate and tender-hearted. And Hareton, rude, surly, ignorant, fierce, yet true as steel, staunch, and with a very loving, faithful heart, constant even to the man who had of set purpose brutalized him and kept him in servitude. "Hareton is damnably fond of me," laughed Heathcliff. "You'll own that I've outmatched Hindley there. If the dead villain could rise from the grave to abuse me for his offspring's wrongs, I should have the fun of seeing the said offspring fight him back again, indignant that he should dare to rail at the one friend he has in the world. He'll never be able to emerge from his bathos of coarseness and ignorance," cried Heathcliff in exultation. "But love can do as much as hatred. Heathcliff himself, as great a boor at 20, contrived to rub off his clownishness in order to revenge himself upon his enemies. Catherine Linton's love inspired Hareton to as great an effort. This odd, rough love story, as harshly sweet as whortleberries, as dry and stiff in its beauty as purple heather sprays, is the most purely human, the only tender interest of Wuthering Heights. It is the necessary and lawful anticlimax to Heathcliff's triumph, the final reassertion of the preeminence of right. Conquered good and conquering ill is often pitiably true, but not an everlasting law, only a too frequent accident. Perceiving this, Emily Brontë shows the final discomfiture of Heathcliff, who, kinless and kithless, was in the end compelled to see the property he has so cruelly amassed descend to his hereditary enemies. And he was baffled not so much by Cathy's and Hareton's love affairs as by this sudden reaction from violence, this slackening of the heartstrings, which left him nerveless and anemic, a prey to encroaching monomania. He had spent his life in crushing the berries for his revenge, in mixing that dark and maddening draught, and when the final moment came, when he lifted it to his lips, desire had left him, he had no taste for it. "I've done no injustices," said Heathcliff, and though his life had been animated by hate, revenge, and passion, let us reflect who have been his victims. Not the old squire who first sheltered him, for the old man never lived to know his favourite's baseness, and only derived comfort from his presence. Catherine Earnshaw suffered, not from the character of her lover, but because she married a man she merely liked, with her eyes open to the fact that she was thereby wronging the man she loved. "You deserve this," said Heathcliff, when she was dying. "You have killed yourself, because misery and degradation and death and nothing that God or Satan could inflict would ever have parted us. You, of your own free will, did it." Not the morality of Mayfair, but one whose lessons, stern and grim enough, must ever be sorrowfully patent to such erring and passionate spirits. The third of Heathcliff's victims then, or rather the first, was Hindley Earnshaw. But if Hindley had not already been a gamester and a drunkard, a violent and soulless man, Heathcliff could have gained no power over him. Hindley welcomed Heathcliff as Faustus the devil, because he could gratify his evil desires, because in his presence there was no need to remember shame, nor high purposes, nor forsaken goodness, and when the end comes, and he shall forfeit his soul, let him remember that there were two at that bargain. Isabella Linton was the most pitiable sufferer. Victim we can scarcely call her, who required no deception but courted her doom. And after all, a marriage chiefly desired in order to humiliate a sister-in-law and show the bride to be a person of importance, was not intolerably requited by 3 months of wretched misery after so much she has suffered to escape. From Edgar Linton, as we have seen, Heathcliff's blows fell aside unharming, as the executioner's strokes from a legendary martyr. He never learnt how secondary a place he held in his wife's heart. He never knew the misery of his only daughter, misery soon to be turned into joy. He lived and died, patient, happy, trustful, unvisited by the violence and fury that had their centre so near his hearth. The younger Catherine and Hareton suffered but a temporary ill. The misery they endured together taught them to love. The tyrant's rod had blossomed into roses. And he, lonely and palsied at heart, eating out his soul in bitter solitude, he saw his plans of vengeance all frustrated, so much elaboration so simply counteracted. It was he that suffered. He suffered now, and Catherine Earnshaw, who helped him to ruin by her desertion, and Hindley, who perverted him by early oppression, they suffered at his hands. But not the sinless, the constant, the noble. Misery in the end shifts its dull mists before the light of such clear spirits. Ta drusanti puthein. "It is a poor conclusion, is it not?" said Heathcliff. "An absurd termination to my violent exertions. I get Levers and Madox to demolish the 2 houses, and train myself to be capable of working like Hercules, and when everything is ready and in my power, I find the will to lift a slate off either roof has vanished. 5 minutes ago Hareton seemed to be a personification of my youth, not a human being. I felt to him in such a variety of ways that it would have been impossible to have accosted him rationally. In the first place, his startling likeness to Catherine connected him fearfully with her. That, however, which you may suppose the most potent to arrest my imagination is in reality the least. For what is not connected with her to me, and what does not recall her? I cannot look down to the floor, but her features are shaped in the flags. In every cloud, in every tree, filling the air by night, and caught by glimpses, in every object by day, I am surrounded by her image. The most ordinary faces of men and women, my own features, mock me with a resemblance. The entire world is a dreadful collection of memoranda that she did exist, and that I have lost her. Well, Hareton's aspect was the ghost of my immortal love, of my wild endeavours to hold my right, my degradation, my pride, my happiness, and my anguish. But it is frenzy to repeat these thoughts to you. Only it will let you know why, with a reluctance to be always alone, his society is no benefit, rather an aggravation of the constant torment I suffer, and it partly contributes to render me regardless how he and his cousin go on together. I can give them no attention any more." Sweet, forward Catherine and coy, passionate Hareton got on very prettily together. I can recall no more touching and lifelike scene than that first love-making of theirs, one rainy afternoon in the kitchen, where Nelly Dean is ironing the linen. Hareton, sulky and miserable, sitting by the fire, hurt by a gunshot wound, but yet more by the manifold rebuffs of pretty Cathy, she, with all her sauciness, limp in the dull wet weather, coaxing him into good temper with the sweetest advancing graces. It is strange that in speaking of Wuthering Heights this beautiful episode should be so universally forgotten, and only the violence and passion of more terrible passages associated with Emily Bronte's name. Yet out of the strong cometh forth the sweet, and the best honey from the dry heather bells. Meanwhile Heathcliff let them go on, frightening them more by his strange mood of abstraction than by his accustomed ferocity. He could give them no attention any more. For 4 days he could neither eat nor rest, till his cheeks grew hollow and his eyes bloodshot, like a person starving with hunger and growing blind with loss of sleep. At last, one early morning, when the rain was streaming in at Heathcliff's flapping lattice, Nelly Dean, like a good housewife, went in to shut it to. The master must be up and out, she said, but pushing back the panels of the enclosed bed, she found him there, laid on his back, his open eyes keen and fierce, quite still, though his face and throat were washed with rain, quite still, with a frightful lifelike gaze of exultation under his brows, with parted lips and sharp white teeth that sneered, quite still and harmless now, dead and stark. Dead before any vengeance had overtaken him, other than the slow retributive sufferings of his own breast, dead, slain by too much hope and an unnatural joy. Never before had any villain so strange an end. Never before had any sufferer so protracted and sinister a torment, beguiled with the spectre of a hope through 18 years. No more public nor authoritative punishment. Hareton passionately mourned his lost tyrant, weeping in bitter earnest and kissing the sarcastic savage face that everyone else shrunk from contemplating, and Heathcliff's memory was sacred, having in the youth he ruined a most valiant defender. Even Catherine might never bemoan his wickedness to her husband. No execrations in this world or the next. A great quiet envelops him. His violence was not strong enough to reach that final peace and mar its completeness. His grave is next to Catherine's and near to Edgar Linton's. Over them all the wild bilberry springs and the peat moss and heather. They do not reck of the passion, the capricious sweetness, the steady goodness that lie beneath. It is all one to them and to the lark singing aloft. I lingered round the graves under that benign sky, watching the moths fluttering among the heath and harebells, listening to the soft wind breathing through the grass, and wondered how any one could ever imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth. So ends the story of Wuthering Heights. The world is now agreed to accept that story as a great and tragic study of passion and sorrow, a wild picture of storm and moorland, of outraged goodness and ingratitude. The world, which has crowned King Lear with immortality, keeps a lesser wreath for Wuthering Heights, but in 1848 the peals of triumph which acclaimed the success of Jane Eyre had no echo for the work of Ellis Bell. That strange genius, brooding and foreboding, intense and narrow, was passed over, disregarded. One author, indeed, in one review, Sidney Dobell, in the Palladium, spoke nobly and clearly of the energy and genius of this book, but when that clarion augury of fame at last was sounded, Emily did not hear. 2 years before, they had laid her in the tomb. No praise for Ellis Bell. It is strange to think that of Charlotte's 2 sisters, it was Anne who had the one short draught of exhilarating fame. When The Tenant of Wildfell Hall was in proof, Ellis's and Acton's publishers sold it to an American firm as the last and finest production of the author of Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. Strange that even a publisher could so blunder, even for his own interest. However, this mistake caused sufficient confusion at Cornhill to make it necessary that the famous Charlotte, accompanied by Anne in her quality of secondary and mistakable genius, should go to town and explain their separate existence. No need to disturb the author of Wuthering Heights, that crude work of a prentice hand, over whose reproduction no publishers quarrelled. Such troublesome honours were not for her. Yet, says Charlotte, I must not be understood to make these things subject for reproach or complaint. I dare not do so. Respect for my sister's memory forbids me. By her any such querulous manifestation would have been regarded as an unworthy and offensive weakness. When indeed did the murmur of complaint pass those pale inspired lips? Failure can have come to her with no shock of aghast surprise. All her plans had failed. Branwell's success, the school, her poems, her strong will had not carried them on to success. But though it could not bring success, it could support her against despair. When this last, dearest, strongest work of hers was weighed in the world's scales and found wanting, she did not sigh, resign herself, and think the battle over. She would have fought again. But the battle was over before victory was declared. No more failures, no more strivings for that brave spirit. It was in July that Charlotte and Anne returned from London. In July, when the heather is in bud, scarce one last withered spray was left in December to place on Emily's deathbed. End of Chapter 15, Part 2.